Well, TikTok, time to rock. How's it going, everyone? We're going to do a couple tests here at the beginning. We are trying to troubleshoot some problems. I've noticed when I'm playing back the audio on some of the live streams that the audio levels are different. So I plugged in a different microphone because I had mine turned all the way up as far as my microphone is concerned. So I used a different microphone that has better volume controls on it. So let me know if everyone hears me clearly. I've never used this mic on here before, so everyone let me know if this is working out. We're trying to troubleshoot some problems as they come up. There is a big one, namely that sometimes 1 or 2 times per live stream, the live stream will just cut out. Even if my internet says it's going lightning fast, it'll just cut out. And the problem went away for about a week and a half. So I wasn't trying to troubleshoot it, but the last live stream I did with Robert Spencer, it cut out again. So Radical Moderate has given me a bunch of tests I can perform that will tell him. He's an IT guy, so he says that, yeah, we can fix that. So I'm going to do that tomorrow night. In the middle of the night, I'm going to do all the tech tests. So Vocab and I will go live in the middle of the night tomorrow. And if those of you want to join on, we can just chat. We're not going to address any topics. We'll be running some tests and running our mouths. All right. So sounds like everyone says they can hear me clearly. Anthony, why don't you go ahead and tell everyone something? And wait, one second. No. What I want everyone to comment on is do our audio levels sound like they're about the same? So go ahead and talk.
Okay, well, you heard David say that tomorrow he's going to just be running his mouth. That's nothing different. Nothing new there.
Won't be the first time.
Won't be the first time. I was just reading the chat.
Hey, Jeepers Creeper says he can't hear anything. I suspect a saboteur. No, everyone else says they're fine. All right, someone said Anthony is a bit lower.
Really?
No, don't worry about it. I have controls here. I have audio controls. So I can control audio to an extent. The problem is once it's maxed out as far as the controls, there's nothing else I can do. But I can raise yours up significantly if I want to, so I just turned it up like 5%. All right, so other people are saying about the same. Someone are saying David Wood seems a little low in audio level. All right. Some good audio. Okay.
Someone asked how I keep a full head of hair.
Yeah, you do.
It's my Sicilian.
Yeah, you have some hair going up like halfway down your forehead like Eddie Munster.
Yeah. In fact, as a kid,
all you need is that point right there.
People used to call me Eddie Munster.
Did you have the point?
I was always told, yeah, if my hair started receding, it would just go back to a normal position.
So someone says Anthony not as clear as David. Well, it might not be as clear. He's using a different microphone. So what we're doing is testing out the audio levels. But ladies and gentlemen, we are going to. Okay, Warrior Woman says audio is perfect. Yeah, head position. I don't know. All right. So anyway, yeah, we'll continue tests at a different time. Looks like we're close to equal on audio levels. But yes, Anthony and I were talking before we went live that the basic plan is I'm going to get everything I can get squared away here to where everything is good for me using the programs and things like that. And then after that, we'll focus on having everyone who's live streaming basically using the same equipment. So I'll get everyone the same webcams, which right now I'm just using the webcam in the computer, but you can actually get much better quality than this. So I'll upgrade mine as soon as I know that works and it's a good piece of equipment and good to use. I'll get Sam and Anthony the same thing. We'll all have the same mics, the same equipment, so we should all be on the same page and shouldn't have any of those problems. But we'll be doing that as we go along. Right now, we are going to, in addition to taking some questions, we are going to talk about a clip from our good friend, Yusha Evans. We were talking about Yusha last time, but Anthony, I think this is actually a good format. Taking a clip from a Muslim apologist, especially when they're making claims about Christianity, and seeing how accurate they are. And Anthony, for those who weren't watching last time when we did briefly discuss Yusha Evans, tell everyone about the good, noble, honest, truthful convert to Islam known as Yusha Evans.
Yeah, so Yusha Evans is like a number of other converts to Islam from Christianity, popular in part, or perhaps it's better to say primarily, by virtue of his testimony story. So one of the things that he does, just like Yusuf Estes and others, is he goes around the country speaking to people about why he became a Muslim, why he left Christianity and now follows Muhammad. And I had an interest in Yusha Evans for a number of years, and part of it, I'm not really sure what it was that caused me to be interested in him. Maybe it was just the fact that he styled himself as a very informed Christian, and so it was somewhat interesting, perhaps, just to watch him and notice all the times he would make mistakes that I thought were just too simple for anyone to make, even if they had only a Sunday school child's understanding of the Christian faith. In any case, what really surprised me was when I finally heard him speak more specifically about where he came from and how he became a Muslim. Because in the past, he would always just speak in generalities. He would say, I was raised in a conservative Christian environment. I went to church all the time, and so forth. But one day, he actually mentioned the city that he came from. And it was Greenville, South Carolina, which perked my ears up because that's where I presently live. Right? I was born and raised in Southern California, but for the past 5 years or so, I've lived in Greenville, South Carolina. And I thought, well, what do you know? The guy came from this area.
Well, one second, Anthony. For all the people who are watching and wanted to chop your head off, what city did you say you lived in one more time?
Greenville, South Carolina. Come on down. So now it gets even more interesting because he mentioned that he grew up, he went to a Methodist church. He says he would go every Wednesday. He'd go twice on Sunday. Here in the South, it's very common. The churches meet in the mornings and in the evenings. So these aren't, some churches will have like a conservative worship service, and then others will have a more contemporary service. There are different reasons why they might have more than one service, but these are two distinct services. In other words, entirely different sermon and so forth. And it's very common that people will go morning and evening. And anyway, so he talks about how frequently he would go to church and how involved he was with the youth group growing up, and how he even became something of a youth pastor. I don't recall that he ever officially identifies himself as a youth pastor, but he was very closely related to teaching youth, and I think was working alongside of a youth pastor.
I think he said youth minister. Right?
Yeah.
I think, and people can correct me, or we can go back and look at the video clips. I think he says youth minister because, as you and I know, that's a term that you could defend if you wanted to, because a minister is any sort of servant, right? So he could say, well, I handed out donuts one day, so I was a youth minister. I was helping out with the youth. But he knows that people take that as youth pastor, so people report him as a former pastor, former youth pastor.
So the other interesting thing about this was, so he mentions that he went to this particular Methodist church, and I wasn't quite sure where that was at until he mentioned somewhere along the line in his path to Islam that he went into a mosque that was across the street from the Methodist church. And as soon as he said that, I knew immediately where it was. There's only, as far as I know, 2 mosques here in Greenville. And this mosque is actually only 2 miles from my house. And so I thought, oh, this is just grand. Now I'm going to make it my mission to go around and, check some of the claims that he's making. And I haven't gotten around to all of that. However, there is one claim that I did look into that was particularly interesting. He made the observation at one point that part of why he lost his confidence in Christianity is because of the idea that the Bible hasn't been preserved. And he says that what he did was he went down to Bob Jones University, which is about 4 or 5 miles down the street from me. And he said he went to their textual criticism department and was asking the professor there certain questions, and he couldn't defend the Bible. And I thought this was humorous because I just know that most institutions, even if they talk about textual matters, it's not very common for them to have a textual criticism department. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I went down to Bob Jones University and I asked for their textual criticism department. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And the one claim.
So Yusha Evans made you look like an idiot.
Yeah, well, now I'm going to return the favor as we watch these clips.
We shall see. All right. So, didn't work out with going to the textual criticism department. Here's what I find interesting. These former so-called Christians who converted to Islam, they're never satisfied with just telling the truth in a straightforward manner. You know what I mean? Yusha, whose real name was Joshua Evans, that's the name he grew up with, he could have simply said, hey, I grew up in a Christian household. I went to church. I eventually had some questions. I didn't think the Christians around me gave very good answers. I started talking to some Muslims. I thought they were making a better case, and I converted to Islam. I don't see why they can't just say that. I don't see why they have to portray themselves as former ministers, former pastors, things like that. So that's true of Yusha. That's true of Yusuf Estes. I don't see why Yusuf Estes can't just say, hey, I went to church. I was somehow involved with like the music or something like this. I had no clue what I was talking about. I never studied apologetics in my life. So I couldn't defend anything in Christianity. And when I was challenged by a Muslim, I had no defense and I converted to Islam. I don't see why you can't just say that. I don't see why they have to try and represent themselves as these extremely knowledgeable Christians who spent years investigating these things. And, I don't see why they have to do that. But that is what they do. And my view, Anthony, and Warrior Woman points out her message here. She says, so true, David, but that doesn't make for an exciting enough revert story, right? Yeah. And that's the case right there. If you want to be invited around the world to speak, you gotta fluff up the details, right? You gotta boost up the details there. And so, but here's the problem. You see, when these guys portray themselves as knowledgeable Christians who spent years studying, then now when they say something that's completely ridiculous and idiotic, they're actually portraying themselves as deceivers, right? So if they were just claiming to be Christians who knew nothing about Christianity, then if they said something today that showed that they have no clue what they're talking about, you could say, okay, they didn't know anything back then, and they still don't know anything. They've just never studied. But when they portray themselves as knowledgeable, people who spent years studying, now when they say something stupid, the conclusion to draw, if we take their words seriously, is that they're lying about what they say, right? They couldn't be making these kinds of blunders if they were really knowledgeable, unless they were just trying to lie. And Anthony, just for old time's sake here, I'm going to go back and play that clip. We'll play the first clip from Yusuf Estes before we go into Yusha Evans. And for those who weren't watching last week, go ahead and tell them, just give them a general gist of what's wrong with this clip. All right, here we go. What isn't wrong, right? So, all right, here we go.
But I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to be honest. This is not for you to, start a debate, but just be honest. was Jesus a Catholic? And it's not open to debate, so there's no point in opening that up, because you know and I know he wasn't. The Catholic Church was in business about 300 years before Jesus was born. It's on their website. Don't go like this. It's on their website. That's where I took it from. The Catholic Church was really started in Rome by Alexander the Great.
All right, Anthony. Did you catch that?
Yeah, I caught part of it, and of course, I've heard the clip before.
Okay. So the Catholic Church was started 3 centuries before Christ by Alexander the Great in Rome. Now, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's the deceptive maneuver of asking whether Jesus was a Catholic. Muslims like to ask these sorts of questions because they've got this weird hang-up on names. If God didn't give a particular name for something, then that thing that the name applies to must not have been true or real or around or what have you. Moving past that, though, the idea that the Catholic Church existed before the coming of Christ is just absurd. There wasn't even a church in Rome until the mid-1st century. Right, Paul writes an epistle to the Christians in Rome, but even then, it's not what we would call the Catholic Church, certainly not in the sense that he's using the term Catholic. If you're using the term Catholic in its original sense, where it just refers to the universal church, that is, all Christians everywhere who call upon the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, that didn't exist until the 1st century. But when he uses the term Catholic, obviously he means Roman Catholic. And that didn't exist in any identifiable or noticeable sense until centuries after that. And the idea that it was founded by Alexander the Great is nonsense. Alexander the Great didn't go to Rome. He didn't establish a church there. So it's just riddled with problems.
So it's almost like, I want to say that, if Yusuf Estes wasn't really a convert to Islam, if he was just the greatest troll in the history of humanity, right, where he would just want to tell, I'm going to show everyone the sorts of things you can say to a Muslim audience who simply won't hold us accountable. I'm going to prove to the world that you can say absolutely anything, no matter how false, no matter how idiotic, no matter how much it would only take 30 seconds of research, even for a person who's never heard any of this in his life. It would only take 30 seconds of research to refute and see that this is nonsense. Just type in Alexander the Great or Catholic Church or any of this.
Now, by the way, just imagine if we were to return the favor and kind of run with what he's saying there. When he says, was Jesus a Catholic, he's asking that question because he thinks it's obviously false. Now, the reason it's obviously false is because Catholicism didn't exist at the time of Christ. But on his scenario, the Catholic Church did exist at the time of Christ, right? Mm-hmm. The Catholic Church was founded 300 years earlier in Rome. Well, who was in power in Israel and over Jerusalem at the time of Christ? Well, of course, it was the Romans. And so we might just as well say, well, then, yes, Jesus was a Catholic, right? Because I mean, I don't think that's the case. My point is simply, if what he's saying is true, well, then we could spin something crazy as well.
But Alan Rule has the refutation here. Don't forget the fact that it's on the Catholic website.
And later in the clip, I don't know if you played that whole thing, there's the time lag, but he also then goes on to mention Encyclopedia Britannica and numerous other reference works.
Yeah, and the reason we're pointing this out, the reason I wanted to bring that up just again is because I want to point out the same thing with Yusha Evans, right? If we take him at all seriously, if he's someone who's even read the book of Acts, and he says he knows the Christian scriptures really well. So if he's doing that, then he has to know that anyone who has read those scriptures knows that he's making things up, right? But the same thing with Yusuf Estes, right? If we take Yusuf seriously and believe that he really knows his stuff, we can only conclude that he's deliberately being deceptive here. Why would a Muslim apologist do that? Well, it seems that they have latched onto something which is true. Statistically, they are correct. It's dishonest. It's immoral. It's deceptive. But statistically, they are right on the money. Namely, if you have an audience of, let's say, 200 people, and you say something that is completely false, like ridiculously false, but only, let's say, 3 or 4 people in the audience know that it's false, and only 3 or 4 more people are the kind of people who are going to go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and look this up, who are going to go to the Vatican's website and look this up, then what happens? Well, you've given 190 or so people completely false information. You've polluted their minds so that they're even more resistant to Christianity, but a few others know that you're lying. Well, if you keep doing that over and over and over again, then every time you go into a room, the vast majority of the people are walking out there thinking you gave a slam dunk case, and only a few people know that you're a liar. If you keep doing that over and over and over again, you eventually have a giant global worldwide mob who can shout down the people that know you're a liar, right? And I think there's a reason that you end up with apologists like this in Islam. I believe that's how Muhammad was. Muhammad was someone who realized very early on, you don't need the best arguments, you don't need the best case, you just need the biggest mob, and you can eventually silence everyone who disagrees with you and everyone who's pointing out how silly your claims are. All right, Anthony, anything you want to add before we start looking at these video clips? And I'm just going to play the clip, let Anthony show how right they are. You good?
Yeah, I'm good. I was going to say something about Muhammad, specifically remember in the Quran, he refers to Mary as the daughter of Imran and sister of Moses. Or Aaron, and when Muhammad was questioned about this, remember it's not until after some of his followers run into somebody else that knows the scoop, and they come back to Muhammad, and then Muhammad, it's like on the fly, just says, "Oh well, back in those days, that's how people referred to, their great ascendants, people way back there in their family tree." If he lived in the 21st century, what he would say is, well, just go look it up. It's on their website, right?
Yeah.
It's on the Vatican's website.
That's what you do. Yeah. Yeah. You are correct with that one, sir. All right. So let's go ahead and look at our first clip. Anthony, if you want to hit your volume, just so everyone knows, it's harder for Anthony to listen to a clip, as the sound's coming through my microphone normally even, but now I'm listening through headphones, so he'll have to listen actually to the same live stream you're listening to listen to the clip. But there's like a 20 to 25 second or so lag, so he'll be a little behind us. All right, you ready, Anthony?
Yep.
Yusha Evans, ladies and gentlemen. I give you Yusha Evans.
What does Islam say about Apostle Paul?
About what?
Paul. What does
Islam say about Paul? Islam doesn't, there's no consensus message about Paul. But let me tell you about Paul. Paul is someone on the day of judgment I don't want to be anywhere near. First and foremost. I want to know what's waiting for him. But Paul is someone who I'm not sure, and no scholar that I've spoken to is sure, what happened with Paul. Was he a saboteur? Was he a saboteur in order to disrupt Christianity or what the followers of Jesus were doing from within? Or was he just fooled by Satan on the road to Damascus when he thought he saw Jesus? That we cannot answer, whether it was blatant or whether he was fooled.
All right. Anthony, are you still listening to that? I want to know how bad the lag is. You still listening?
So what was I actually just played the video that I have.
Oh, okay.
I thought that. So at what point did it end?
We don't know whether Paul was
a deceiver or deceived, saboteur or...
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, he said he doesn't want to be anywhere near Paul on Judgment Day. Well,
yeah.
I don't think you have to worry about that one, Yusha. All right. But there are plenty of interesting things there. One is he claims that there's no consensus position in Islam. That's certainly true now, but back in the day, they seem to have a different view. But go wherever you want, Anthony.
Yeah. So maybe we can get to that part at some point, because it we can go at this in a number of directions. But yeah, so first of all, he says that he doesn't want to be anywhere near Paul on the day of resurrection. So if it turns out that Paul was in fact an apostle of Christ, that he received revelation from the Lord Jesus and proclaimed the true gospel, then Paul is going to be on Christ's right hand on the day of resurrection. Remember, the Lord Jesus, according to the Gospels, said, for example, in Matthew 25, that on the day of judgment, he's going to return, raise the living and the dead, and he's going to set the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. To those on his right, he's going to say, enter into the joy of the Lord and so forth, the kingdom prepared for you from before the foundation of the world. And those on his left, he's going to consign to eternal punishment or judgment. And so if Paul is in fact one of Christ's hand-picked and chosen apostles, somebody who purveyed the true gospel, then Paul's going to be one of those on Christ's right, and Yusha Evans, by his, out of his own mouth, is going to be far away from him. In fact, he's going to hear those words, depart from me, I never knew you. So those are the stakes, right? And it's not just the case for Yusha Evans, but for all those that he either deceives or confirms in the deception they're already laboring under as Muslims. But he says there are two possibilities here, because now remember he said that there's no consensus in Islam on the Apostle Paul. As you've already mentioned, and we'll come back to, the earliest Muslims not only thought that Paul was a true follower of Jesus, but they also thought that there's a particular Quranic verse that had reference to Paul among others, and so we'll come back to that. But he gives us two options here. He says Paul was either a saboteur, somebody who was deliberately trying to destroy Christianity. Right now, he's speaking this from a Muslim perspective, right? Because as a Muslim, the message of Paul, really the message of Christianity, right, which they want to identify with Paul so that they can then try and disparage Paul, and by disparaging Paul, ultimately undermine the gospel. But from the Muslim perspective, what Paul says about Jesus is false, right? Jesus isn't God. Jesus didn't die on the cross. His death wasn't a sacrifice for sins. Salvation isn't by grace through faith in Christ alone. Those sorts of things. And but what Yusha doesn't seem to realize is that there's he doesn't just say that Paul was a deceiver. He says that Paul was a saboteur. Now there's a distinct difference there, because if there could be any number of reasons why somebody might want to deceive, right? A person could want to deceive so that they might elevate themselves in some way or benefit themselves, right? They could either elevate themselves in the sense of getting authority over others, right? Having a certain power, like being able to wield or to control an army, for example. Like maybe they have vengeance in their heart and they want to go back and destroy people that were mean to them at one point in their life. For example, like Muhammad, right? Muhammad, when he went to Mecca or Medina and was accepted there as a prophet, that brought to him a lot of power. But he's not saying that Paul was a deceiver, that he's trying to get money, that sort of thing. He's saying that Paul was a saboteur. And the idea here is that Paul was so committed to Judaism that he recognized Christianity as something diametrically opposed to it, and therefore something to be fought with at all costs, even if it meant pretending himself to be a Christian, right? And then trying to destroy it from within. And one of the problems there, and by the way, I should back up for a second. When I mentioned that Paul, he's not just saying he's a deceiver. I mean, we know from the New Testament and other sources that Paul certainly wasn't after power and wealth and women and those sorts of things. Paul remained unmarried. Whether he was married at one point or not, we don't know, but certainly throughout his apostolic career, his missionary labors, establishing churches and so forth, Paul didn't have a wife. He certainly wasn't out to make money. the Apostle Paul didn't live off of the proceeds of others. Remember, in 1 Corinthians 9, he says he has the right, as somebody who labors in the gospel, to benefit materially from those that he's ministering to spiritually, but he forgoes that right and instead chooses to labor with his own hands, right? So Paul wasn't after anybody's money, and he certainly wasn't after being coddled or anything else, because Paul endured great suffering. In fact, at one point in the clips, we'll get to it, we're going to see one example of that, right? That this didn't bring Paul anything outwardly beneficial.
Yeah, Anthony, let me go ahead and read very quickly Paul's description of his life as an apostle, right? So you've got Muhammad, and he's getting women and girls and sex slaves and more slaves, and he's just balling. Let's read Paul's description of his life as an apostle. 2 Corinthians 11:23-27. He says, I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. And this is at the time that he was writing 2 Corinthians, so he still had years of persecutions and beatings to go after this. But that's Paul's life. So if you want to say, hey, he's making this up, the point Anthony is making, he's clearly not making it up because he just wants to get something out of it.
Yeah. And by the way, there's no point when you think about it where this was good for Paul in terms of his outward lifestyle, because when Paul was first converted, before he became like a lightning rod for the Jews, somebody that they wanted to attack, the early Christians viewed him with suspicion, right? Because he was a persecutor of the church. He was violently opposed to the church. He was responsible for the deaths of numerous Christians, most prominently the deacon Stephen. But he had official letters from the Jewish leaders to go and seek out Christians in the synagogue, Jews who profess faith in Christ, and cart them off to Jerusalem to be tried and punished. And so Paul, when he first converts to the faith, he's not viewed, they don't fling open the doors and say, hey, Paul, come here. They're thinking this is part of a trick. Mm-hmm. They think, like Yusha Evans, that what Paul is trying to do is get close to them so that he might find out, relevant information and then facilitate, carting them off to Jerusalem. So, but then as he becomes more known, the Christians start to receive him. Now he's also being recognized by the Jews as somebody who's not only proclaiming Christ, but doing so effectively. And now then they want to, get Paul and do to Paul what Paul had previously been doing to the Jewish Christians. Mm-hmm. So there doesn't seem to be any point at which this becomes a comfortable thing for Paul. So the idea that Paul was simply a deceiver doesn't work. But maybe you could say, well, okay, Paul was trying to sabotage Christianity. So he believed in Judaism. He thought Christianity was false. And so what he's going to do is now distort the message and bring Christianity into ill repute by virtue of that. Now, the problem here is, it's very similar to the parable that Jesus gives about a kingdom divided against itself can't stand, right? Mm-hmm. It's one thing if Paul goes out and makes up ridiculous things and gets people laughing at Christians and that sort of thing, but that's the opposite of what we see with Paul. We see Paul going out and being quite effective in converting people to Christ and making great strides among the Gentiles even. And so the idea that Paul is simply, distorting the message to make it a laughingstock just doesn't hold water, because Paul is far too effective mm-hmm. for somebody who's trying to make Christianity a laughingstock. Mm-hmm. Indeed, he's so effective that eventually it's Paul's gospel, right, that eventually overtakes the Roman Empire, mm-hmm. right? Not just Paul's gospel. We're not buying into the the liberal and Muslim myth that Paul, is the source of Christianity.
Yeah.
Paul
you mean the gospel that Paul preached?
Right,
Yeah.
which is no different, as we'll see, than what the apostles taught, than what Christ taught. So Paul is so effective. The idea that he was a saboteur just, doesn't hold any water.
Think about it. Notice as you were mentioning earlier, Paul's not getting anything in terms of worldly benefits out of this. On the contrary, right? He was a respected Jewish rabbi, an up and coming rabbi who was especially known for his zeal for Judaism and the traditions of Judaism. He was a student of Gamaliel, one of the great Jewish rabbis of the first century. So this guy would have had a very comfortable, very respected life. In addition to all that, he had the honor of being a Roman citizen. So Paul would have had a very, very comfortable life. He chose to become a Christian for reasons that we'll be discussing. But notice the absurdity. If you wanted to say, which is really the only thing you could say, so the fact that the only thing you actually can say is ridiculous shows that the entire position is ridiculous. If you wanted to say he was a saboteur, as you pointed out, it would have to be because he's a Jew and he doesn't like the teachings of Christianity, so he's going to decide to infiltrate them and then ruin them from the inside. Now, what's the additional problem I see here is that this presupposes that Christianity is significantly different enough from Judaism that would set Paul in a rage against it to decide that I really have to sabotage this. Now think about this. What is it that's so radically different between classic Judaism and Christianity? Well, it's belief that Jesus died on the cross for sins and rose from the dead and that he is Lord. But those are precisely the beliefs that Muslims are saying Paul invented. So if you take those out and Christianity was just whatever was, if Christianity was just Judaism without those things, what would Paul be mad about here? What in the name of common sense would this guy be mad about? You can't just say, oh, because, he regarded Jesus as the Messiah. Regarding believing someone was the Messiah wasn't punishable by death. You didn't say, oh, hey, I believe this guy's the Messiah, therefore you have to be killed. He would have never been given papers to go out and go after the church. So why, in the name of common sense, would Paul and the other early Jewish leaders be so diametrically opposed to the teachings of Christ that they want to go after them, that they want to sabotage them through the Apostle Paul? There's no reason. Once you take away the beliefs that Muslims say Paul invented, there's no reason for these guys to be upset about the message of Christ. And so, it's the idea that he's a saboteur is simply beyond ridiculous. But as Muslims, you have to point a finger at Paul. And let me just say, as a side note, just so. We're going to be going into details and stuff, but we don't want anyone to miss the big picture. The big picture of why people like Yusha Evans and other Muslims have to point a finger at the Apostle Paul is that they need someone to blame for the teachings of Christianity not lining up with Islam, right? So Muhammad taught his followers that Jesus came and preached Islam, and his followers were Muslims. So Jesus' followers, people like Peter and James and John, these guys converted to Islam at the preaching of Jesus. And so these guys were just early Muslims. Now, the obvious question arises, well, if these guys were Muslims, why do we find the teachings of Christianity that Jesus died on the cross for sins, that he rose from the dead, and that he is Lord? Well, if you're a really, 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 really dumb Muslim apologist, you'll say, it happened at the Council of Nicaea, right? You have to blame someone later for changing the message because the records we have for what Jesus taught don't line up with the things Muhammad taught. So you have to blame someone for corrupting it. You have to blame someone for corrupting it, right? And so lots of Muslims will say, the Council of Nicaea, they changed everything. The problem with that is if you know at all what you're talking about as a Muslim, you know that we can trace belief in Jesus' death for sins, his resurrection, and his divine nature right back to the first century. So unless you think the people at the Council of Nicaea built a time machine and went back to the first century to corrupt it in the first century, the Council of Nicaea objection doesn't work. That's made for ignorant people who don't know anything, right? And that again is a problem in Islam, that Muslim apologists know that in their audience, in the Muslim audience, the vast majority of Muslims have no clue what happened at the Council of Nicaea. They've never looked it up. They don't know that you could very easily look up exactly what happened at the Council of Nicaea, and they won't do it. They'll just believe whatever the Muslim speaker is saying. So your average Muslim apologist knows you can say something like that. Oh, Council of Nicaea. And yeah, 99% of the people will mindlessly believe you. The 1% who might look it up, well, they know you're a deceiver, but who cares, right? You've got the biggest crowd. So if you want a stronger case as a Muslim, you have to explain how these doctrines came about in the first century. Belief in Jesus' death for sins, his resurrection, and his divine nature. You need someone not centuries later. You need someone in the first century. So the question is, who in the first century can you point to and say was powerful enough and influential enough to corrupt Christianity at its very core? Well, you can't say Jesus because he's a devout Muslim, according to Islam. He's a Muslim prophet. You can't say his original apostles because, according to the Quran, they're devout Muslims. So you need someone in the first century who's not Jesus and not one of the original apostles, but who's still really powerful so that you can blame him for corrupting Christianity. And the only person that Muslims can come up with is the Apostle Paul, right? He wasn't Jesus. He wasn't one of the original apostles. And yet he was very powerful, very influential in early Christianity. So Paul is the only guy that they can blame for why things don't line up with what Muhammad said. So Paul is really all they have. They have to blame Paul. If their accusations against Paul fail, Islam fails because they have no one else to blame for who could get Christianity that wrong so that it doesn't line up with Islam at all on these basic doctrines. So they have to go there. They have to go there. And that's what they do. But notice, Yusha already has to spout a ton of nonsense in order to point a finger at Paul.
Yeah, I'd throw in here, there's also another reason I think not only Muslims, but liberal scholars, whom Muslims sometimes pick this stuff up from, go after Paul. When we talk about the evidence for the truth of Christianity, we mention certain things most prominently. For example, the empty tomb, his post-resurrection appearances, and the transformation of the disciples. Well, when you look at people who are giving a fuller case, if they were to add a fourth reason, the one that usually comes to mind, in addition to those three, is the conversion of the Apostle Paul. Mm-hmm. Paul's conversion is monumental when you look at it. Scholars, even those who have every reason not to want to believe in Christianity and do their best to argue against it, they look at Paul as an incredibly problematic figure, because here you have a guy, as you already mentioned, who had made great strides in Judaism. If he was looking for, pride of place, some kind of standing among others, he already had it or was well on his way to getting there. Paul could boast in any way that any other Jew could boast. Paul had it, right? And most of them couldn't say that all the things Paul could say of himself were true of them. And Paul obviously had the zeal to go along with it because he's going around persecuting Christians. And so for Paul to be converted to the faith, something had to happen. How do you get this guy who is a staunch Jew, who knew the scriptures, who had a standing in Judaism that he was going to lose if he accepted Jesus as the Messiah? How do you account for this guy's radical transformation? You've got to do something with that. And so, and the sort of thing that Yusha Evans is trying here is what some have tried, but most scholars, they're not comfortable with these answers and I'm talking about the ones who don't accept the truth of Christianity. They're not comfortable with the idea that Paul was simply a saboteur, most of them. I mean, you do have fringe scholars who say that sort of thing, or that he was simply deceived. They try to figure out some other way to account for the phenomena of Paul's conversion. But
yeah, and I pointed out that we don't want to sort of lose sight of the big picture here, but that's also true of losing the big picture of of what this means for Islam. As Anthony pointed out, we'll be looking at the position of early Muslims on the Apostle Paul. But I don't want anyone throughout this discussion, don't lose the big picture here of what Muslim apologists are actually saying. Because think about this, ladies and gentlemen. According to Islam, Allah sent Jesus and gave him an unparalleled miraculous birth, right? So, miraculous virgin birth, then gave him the most miraculous life in history, right? So Jesus is raising the dead. He's curing lepers. He's curing all these people, not according to Christianity, according to the Quran, right? Then, when people tried to kill him, Allah miraculously rescued him, disguised someone else to make him look like Jesus, and then took Jesus to heaven. And not only that, he's going to have Jesus return later to judge. So think about all of those things. Jesus is very important, but Jesus, according to Islam, was successful. Jesus preached Islam and won a number of converts, right? He won a number of converts. There are people who converted. Right? And Allah says in the Quran that he aided the true followers of Jesus until they became uppermost, right? Matter of fact, let me go and read. This is chapter 61, verse 14 of the Quran. Allah says, "O you who believe, be helpers in the cause of Allah, as Jesus, son of Mary, said to his disciples, 'Who are my helpers in the cause of Allah?' The disciples said, 'We are helpers in the cause of Allah.'" So this is Jesus' followers admitting that they're Muslims. And it says, "So a party of the children of Israel believed, and another party disbelieved. Then we, Allah, aided those who believed against their enemy, and they became uppermost." So Allah doesn't just let Jesus preach the message and then see how things turn out. Allah actively helps Jesus' Muslim followers until they become uppermost over those who rejected Jesus. Now, why is all of this relevant? Well, according to Yusha Evans, Paul then went in there and corrupted all of Christianity. Does that make sense from an Islamic perspective? Allah specifically says that he is supernaturally intervening in this from beginning to end. He's supernaturally intervening in Jesus' birth. He's supernaturally intervening in Jesus' miracles. He's supernaturally intervening when people try to kill Jesus. He assures Jesus, he tells Jesus that he's going to protect his followers until the day of resurrection. That hasn't come yet, so he's still protecting Jesus' followers. Then Allah says that he miraculously, supernaturally intervened to help Jesus' disciples, his followers, so that they would be victorious over the people who rejected Jesus. Who, according to Muslims, that would have included the Apostle Paul, right? So Allah supernaturally helps Jesus' true followers, makes them victorious, superior to those who are trying to sabotage Jesus and reject Jesus, which, again, according to Muslims, would include the Apostle Paul. That's the position you get according to the Quran. And what does Yusha Evans say? Nope, but Paul came in, corrupted Christianity, that's why Christianity is corrupted. So did Allah really, according to Yusha Evans, did Allah really help and aid Jesus' followers until they became victorious, triumphant over the people who rejected Jesus? No, the people who rejected Jesus, according to Muslims, came in and crushed all of the work that Jesus and Allah had done. He crushed it. He crushed it and corrupted Christianity. Allah didn't stand a chance against the Apostle Paul. So don't lose sight of that. And everything else we're discussing, don't lose sight of that absolute ridiculous, because as a Muslim, you should be saying this is ridiculous. As a Muslim, you should be saying, wait a minute. Allah is miraculously intervening from beginning to end, and then one guy comes in and just messes it all up, pulls the rug right out from under Allah, Jesus, and all these Muslims. One guy comes in there and destroys all of that work. That's what you Muslims, that's what Yusha Evans and pretty much every other Muslim apologist out there is saying now. Paul did it. Allah couldn't stop him. Allah was going to protect Jesus' followers until the day of resurrection, but he couldn't stop the Apostle Paul from coming in there and corrupting everything. Very, very silly. What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, let me just throw in here, and you're familiar with this citation, but it's from Yusuf Ali in his commentary on the Quran. he says regarding Surah 61:14, and we'll have more to say about that verse later, but here's Yusuf Ali's commentary on that verse. And remember, Yusuf Ali is a Muslim, right? He's not trying to give an apologetic for Christianity, but he's obviously not thinking through the implications of what he's saying. He's just
They never do. They never do.
Right. But here's what he says. A portion of the children of Israel, the ones that really cared for truth, believed in Jesus and followed his guidance. But the greater portion of them were hard-hearted and remained in their beaten track of formalism and false racial pride. The majority seemed, at first, to have the upper hand when they thought they had crucified Jesus and killed his message. But they were soon brought to their senses. Jerusalem was destroyed by Titus in AD 70, and the Jews have been scattered ever since. On the other hand, those who followed Jesus permeated the Roman Empire, brought many races within their circle, and through the Roman Empire, Christianity became the predominant religion of the world. And then he adds this statement, until the advent of Islam. Well, no, not until the advent of Islam. Still, right? It's still the predominant religion of the world. But the point is, he's admitting that Christianity was ultimately what prevailed, whereas the Jews who opposed Christ ultimately did not prevail, right? And so once we realized, though, that it was the message of Paul, as well as the other apostles, but Paul in concert with them, that is what permeated the Roman Empire and brought various races within its pale and so forth. The idea that Paul is the great corrupter of Christianity necessarily falls if you accept the Quran's own statement about Allah causing them to be superior. And by the way, for those that are taking notes, David quoted Surah 61:14. You might also note what it says in Surah 355, something very similar. If I can just pull it up here real quick. Surah 355 says, "Behold, Allah said, O Jesus, I will take you and raise you to myself and clear you of the falsehoods of those who blaspheme. I will make those who follow you superior to those who reject faith to the day of resurrection. Then shall your return be to me, and I'll judge between you in the matters that you dispute about." So again, Allah says not only that he's going to aid the believers and cause them to prevail over their enemies, he's going to make them superior to them, and he's going to do so until the day of resurrection.
Long time.
Right. And he's not talking, but the thing to notice is that he's not just saying that in the future, 600 years from now, I'm going to bring a group that will eventually, maybe thousands of years after that, become the predominant religion. He's talking about taking that group of people, right, those people in the first century, and he's going to cause them to become uppermost and prevail, and they're going to prevail and be superior throughout history. Okay, so you can't, in other words, you can't just try and chop up history and say there was this 600-year gap or what have you. He's talking about the followers of Christ, and he's going to aid them throughout history and cause them to be uppermost. I think there's some this is partially why Muslims like to say Islam is the fastest growing religion. I think this is the closest they can get, at least in their minds, to what this passage is talking about. But obviously, it still falls short, right? Islam isn't the predominant religion. Muslims are not superior. But in fact, it's the Christianity that permeated the Roman Empire and overtook it and is still the largest religion in the world. Yeah.
Now, the commentary that Anthony read, everyone, from Yusuf Ali, that was the commentary on Surah 61:14. And notice, in order to understand what Allah means by saying that he aided the followers of Jesus until they became uppermost, right? Because this is the language of them actually becoming more powerful, right? What does this mean? Well, Yusuf Ali, in his commentary on the Quran, which if you get a Yusuf Ali edition of the Quran, very common. If it's got the commentary, you can go ahead and read that. Very important. He says that this refers to Christianity taking over the Roman Empire. But guess what? We know what the Christianity of the Roman Empire taught. Jesus died on the cross for sins. He rose from the dead, and he is Lord, right? That's the Christianity of the Roman Empire. And those Christians believed in the authority of the Apostle Paul. So if Allah, follow us now, if Allah helped the true followers of Jesus until they became powerful and took over the Roman Empire, and the followers of Jesus who took over the Roman Empire believed in his death, resurrection, and deity, then what do the true followers of Jesus believe? Those things. Now notice, there's no way around this, right? If you want to say true Christianity was Islam, well, guess what? If true Christianity was Islam, then that got wiped out so fast that we have no record that it even existed. Does that sound like Allah protected it until the day of resurrection? Does that sound like Allah helped the true followers until they became uppermost and took over the Roman Empire? Is that what it sounds like? No, there's no way around this, Muslims, right? If you want to say Paul corrupted Christianity, great. The Quran is wrong when it says that Allah helped the true followers until they became uppermost, until they took over, right? You'd have to say the Quran is false when it says Allah is going to protect them until the day of resurrection. He didn't. He failed miserably. Allah couldn't do it. So if you want to say Paul corrupted Christianity, you have to say the Quran is wrong. But if you want to say, no, Allah meant what he said in those verses, well, then Paul couldn't corrupt Christianity. Paul is a true follower of Jesus, and the other things in the Quran that deny Jesus' death, resurrection, and deity, those are false. But notice, under no circumstances can you take all of these claims in the Quran seriously. They don't allow you to, not if you know anything about history. And so you guys just got a problem.
Yeah, maybe this is a good time to actually bring in here what the Islamic sources actually say about Paul, since we've already mentioned Surah 61:14.
And matter of fact, and by the way, this is why they say it, right? The early Muslim community was reasoning the exact same way we are. They're saying, wait a minute, Allah said he helped the true followers of Jesus. They became uppermost. So he's helping them. So whatever the Christianity that came to the Roman Empire, whatever that was teaching, that was the message of Jesus, because Allah said he helped them. So the early disciples, the early apostles, they have to be as good as gold here. Go ahead. So what did they say?
Yeah. So I'll just read one statement, because it actually gives us two reputable Islamic authorities. But this is Al-Qurtubi. He's commenting on Surah 61:14. He says, it was said that this verse, Surah 61:14, was revealed about the apostles of Jesus, meaning they were going to prevail, and the Christians through them would be uppermost. He says, may peace and blessings be upon them. He said, Ibn Ishaq, so the earliest extant biography that we have on Muhammad, this is Al-Qurtubi still, he's referring to Ibn Ishaq. Ibn Ishaq stated that of the apostles and disciples that Jesus sent to preach, there were Peter and Paul, who went to Rome, Andrew and Matthew, who went to the land of the cannibals, Thomas, who went to Babel in the eastern lands, Philip, who went to Africa, John went to, this is sort of unintelligible here, it says Daxos, which is the tribe to whom the sleepers of the cave belong, and it goes on and mentions other disciples and apostles and where they went. And so Paul is included here as one of the true followers of Christ, somebody who proclaimed the true message of Jesus. And he goes on, by the way, this is still Al-Qurtubi, Allah supported them, Peter, Paul, Thomas, and so forth, with evidence so that they prevailed, meaning they became the party with the upper hand. Just as it is said, an object appeared, he's quoting something that was a well-known saying among the Arabs to explain what it means. And I won't read it because it won't be intelligible to us, but it's an idiom that the Arabs understood to mean to refer to somebody who's prevailed over against another person. So according to Al-Qurtubi, according to Ibn Ishaq, this verse is referring to the apostles of Paul, and or apostles of Christ, and that includes the apostle Paul. And the reasoning, like you said, is because they are the ones who prevailed.
And so the early Muslim community, and by the way, there are multiple examples of this. The early Muslim community, if you ask them, hey, what about the Apostle Paul? They would say, well, it's not like anyone could come and corrupt Christianity, the message of Jesus. So these guys must have been good as gold there. It's Muslims today who actually are a bit more familiar about the teachings of Paul, who recognize that they've got a problem. It's a similar situation to what the early Muslims thought about the gospel, right? If you go to the early Muslims and say, hey, what's up with the gospel, that book that the Christians have? They would say, well, of course, no one can change Allah's words. Allah in his Quran affirms the inspiration and the preservation and the authority of the scriptures of the Christians. So yes, if you go to the scriptures of the Christians, that's straight up revelation from Allah. The Christians may corrupt it in what they say or in what they believe, but the scriptures cannot be corrupted. That's what the early Muslim community would have said. You go to Muslims today, nope, your scriptures have been corrupted. Why? Because they know that it doesn't line up with Islam. So what you have is, before Muslims sort of lift the veil, so to speak, and go and look at what the Bible says, before they go and look at what the Apostle Paul taught, they're thinking our scriptures are good and the Apostle Paul is good. They conclude that based on what the Quran says. They conclude that based on what the Quran says. Now, the obvious conclusion to draw here is, if that's what you would conclude based on the Quran, if you read the Quran and would conclude that the scriptures of the Christians are as good as gold and that the Apostle Paul is as right as rain, the conclusion that you should draw when you go and figure out that Paul and the gospel doesn't line up with Islam at all, the conclusion you should draw is the Quran is wrong. The Quran got some things wrong because there are only two possibilities, right? Either Paul and the New Testament are reliable. If they are, there are two possibilities. They're reliable or they're unreliable. If they're reliable, then Islam is false because Islam contradicts the Apostle Paul and contradicts the gospel, the scriptures that we have. So if Paul and the New Testament are reliable, Islam is false. If Paul and the New Testament are not reliable, Islam is false because Islam affirms our scriptures and the reliability of the original witnesses of Jesus, the ones who carried it out to the rest of the world. So if Paul and the gospel are reliable, Islam is false. If they're not reliable, Islam is false. Either way, Islam is false. Why are Muslims sitting here defending this obviously false religion? Hey, Anthony, let me give you a comment here. So this is the response. We're laying out the facts. We're laying out the facts, showing that people like Yusha Evans and Yusuf Estes have no clue what they're talking about. What's the response? Plain and simple, Muhammad has the greatest influence on this world, and y'all jealous. You might be racist. That's the response. Notice, ladies and gentlemen,
I expected it to be Salmon Player, so.
Yeah. Well, he may. I haven't read the comments yet, but yeah, I was looking for comments from a Muslim, and this is what we got. You might be racist with all your facts. You're all just jealous of Muhammad's influence on the world. Yeah, all that jihad and all that abuse of women and raping, the gang rape gangs in the UK and in other places. Yeah, we're just jealous. I wish our religious leaders could have had that kind of influence on the world. But if you want to brag about that, that's fine.
Yeah, and what's the bit about racism? There are Arab Christians. We're proclaiming that the Apostle Paul was a true disciple. He's, I'm Sicilian. Paul's not Sicilian. I mean, I don't know what motivation do I have to say that this Jewish guy, was a true apostle of Christ. And by the way, if he's paying attention to what we're saying, if what we're saying is racist, that Paul wasn't a deceiver, he was a true apostle of Christ, the message that Paul conveyed prevailed, as did that of the other apostles. If all that amounts to racism, then what does he say about Al-Qurtubi, Ibn Ishaq, both of whom agreed with the interpretation we're putting forth,
yeah, they're racist.
Which
they're
is the
racist.
obvious interpretation of the Quran. So Muhammad must be racist too.
Yeah, they're right. Well, I mean, he did call Ethiopians raisin heads.
Yeah, but so he's racist for a different reason, though.
Yeah, and he did, let's be clear, buy, own, sell, and trade black African slaves.
And went out of his way to say he's as white as Wesley.
His followers. You were about
How does
to
it go?
You can put it in like 20 different ways, but I think I think what you're referring to is I said he makes Vanilla Ice look like Wesley Snipes or something like that. Yeah, he's so white. But no, we're exposing Islam, so we're just jealous and probably racist here. Notice the Islamic reasoning, the Islamic method of responding. All right, should we go ahead and take a look at the next clip, Anthony?
Well, wait, one more thing.
Oh.
So we spent a lot of time talking about the idea that Paul was a saboteur, and he was trying to deceive people.
Oh, yeah. You had the alternative that he was deceived.
that he was deceived. Now, in principle, we've already dealt with this as far as Muslims should be concerned, right? We've already shown the Quran rules out either one of these options, right? But since we don't really accept the Quran, Christianity doesn't stand or fall on the Quran, we do believe there are answers to both of these objections, quite apart from appealing to any Islamic notions. The idea that Paul was deceived requires certain evidence for it, right? If you want to say Paul was deceived by Satan, he was possessed or something along those lines, well, then you need evidence for it. And David, what sort of evidence would we look for to know if somebody was in fact duped, deceived, and perhaps even possessed by Satan? Do we have anything in the Apostle Paul, for example, where he talks about delivering revelations from Satan, that Satan put his words on his tongue? Do we have Paul saying at the time that he received inspiration that he would be thrown to the ground, he would violently convulse, his eyes would roll back in his head, he would froth at the mouth, he would hear the ringing of bells in his ears? Do we hear Paul saying that he thought he was under a spell? Those are the sorts of things that we would look for if you're going to say that somebody has been overtaken by Satan or something along those lines. But we don't find anything like that when it comes to the Apostle Paul, right? Mm-hmm. In fact, I could read numerous scholars who, again, not Christians, who don't believe that Christianity is true, but when they look at this idea that Paul was deceived by Satan or satanically possessed, they look at this and they say things like, if this is what it looks like to be demon possessed, then would to God that he allowed more people to be possessed. And what they're saying is that Paul, ends up being a paragon, really, of sanity and moral virtue and fortitude. Scholars who don't agree with Paul's gospel nevertheless look at Paul and they're amazed at the kind of character that he had, right? Paul was a person who was content in all circumstances. You read Paul's epistles, when Paul talks about being beaten by the Jews and whipped and stoned, he's not complaining. He's setting these things forth saying, look, those who are telling you that I'm a false apostle, who are telling you that I'm just trying to deceive you so that I can make things good for myself, what sense does that make? I was beaten close to death. I'm not sitting in a mansion somewhere. So Paul is simply laying these things out, but he could say that he endured all things for the sake of Christ. He gloried in the fact that he was able to suffer for the cause of Christ. And so if this is what possession looks like, certain scholars who don't agree with Paul would say, have said things like, we could sure use a whole lot more of that. Mm-hmm. But now, all the things that I listed that we might look for in the case of somebody who is possessed, while we don't find them in Paul, where do we find them?
I can think of one place.
Yeah. And I think all the viewers know who we're talking about, right? The Islamic sources. In fact, I've said this before. I don't know if it was in one of our broadcasts, but I'm not someone who's quick to say when you have somebody who's let's say somebody started a false religion. It's not my first inclination to say that person was possessed. Mm-hmm. I think there are plenty of other possible explanations that are more likely first. Mm-hmm. When I look, for example, at Joseph Smith, I think he, the founder of Mormonism. I spent a good deal of time studying Mormonism. I used to live in Nevada, which has a large Mormon population. Spent a lot of time in Utah witnessing to Mormons. And in the course of all the reading and interaction with Mormons, I came to the conclusion that Joseph Smith was a brazen huckster. The seminal claim of Joseph Smith was that he found gold plates that had the ancient records of the Americans, that Jesus Christ appeared to, and so forth, the history of the Americas prior to its being settled by Europeans. He claimed to find these gold plates. Well, part of what's interesting with all of that is before Joseph Smith claimed to have found these plates, he was convicted of fraudulent dealings with respect to the very similar claims, right? He claimed that he could find hidden gold and treasure in the earth through divining methods and so forth. and he was convicted of fraud for that. So here you've got this guy who's got a history of that sort of thing. Now he claims that he's found these records of Christ's visit to the Americas and other things. All that sort of stuff just to me speaks that this, fraudulent. This guy's just trying to deceive people. And what does he do? He gets power, he gets money, he gets women, right? Well, when it comes to Muhammad, while I'm not discounting that he had similar motives, he's probably the one person in history that stands out to me that if I'm going to, really make a bet and say this person really was possessed. I mean, because again, remember, the Bible teaches that the heart of man is corrupt. There's enough corruption in the human heart to account for people lying and creating false religions. But the evidence of Muhammad being demon-possessed is just incredible. I mean, it just leaves me baffled, and that it's all still in the Islamic sources. It makes you wonder what they've left out. Yeah. You have the idea that Muhammad was demon-possessed going all the way back to his wet nurse, right? Remember, his mom gave him to a Bedouin woman to nurse because they thought it was better for the child's maturation and his health and so forth to be raised out in the arid regions and so forth. And but the Bedouin women who would profit from this, the woman who took Muhammad brought her back to his mother and said, "I don't want this child." And when the mother pressed him or pressed her for an explanation, she said, "There's something wrong with this child." And you also have the something similar when he was 12 or 14. Where there's this incident where Muhammad falls to the ground, and the tale is spun by his cousin, I believe it was, who said that what happened was his chest was opened up and his heart was taken out. It became something else, but anyways, just the basic point, and they've heard us talk about this before. Throughout Muhammad's life, you have these incidents that other people interpret as demonic possession, and then
and Muhammad himself.
Yeah, Muhammad himself. Yeah, and then what happens? Right, he goes on to proclaim a religion that caters to his desires, which is the sort of thing you'd expect if Satan's behind this, and is demonic to the core. When Jesus said that Satan was a murderer from the beginning, he comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Those are all, those could be the watchword of Islam, right? I mean, they should put that right on the front of every Quran, right? I mean, so we don't find that in the case of the Apostle Paul. We do find it in the case of Muhammad. So if somebody wants to talk about being deceived, they're going to actually have to look at the evidence. You don't find it in the case of Paul. You do find it in the case of Muhammad.
And you find a lot of it in the case of Muhammad. So the point there, ladies and gentlemen, is Yusha Evans is blaming the Apostle Paul, saying, "Hey, I don't know if he was deliberately trying to deceive people," which wouldn't make any sense. That being a saboteur wouldn't make any sense. His life was really, really rough, and he went to his bloody death, getting beheaded for his claims about Jesus. Doesn't sound like he's trying to deceive people there. Or you can say he was actually deceived by Satan. But if you want to say, hey, Paul was deceived by Satan, he's been given false visions, false revelations. Well, if you're going to look at anyone in history who looks like he's being influenced by demonic forces, it's Muhammad. Read the sources on how he got his revelations. It sounds like something you'd see in an exorcist film. That's what it sounds like, right? So if you want to point a finger at anyone, Muhammad's going to lose. Muhammad's going to lose by comparison. Now I had a couple comments here. From Muhammad. Muhammad in the comment section, not the false prophet Muhammad. But he says, "You guys are just outright lying now." No, notice.
About what?
Yeah, give us an example, right? Show us where we're lying. We'll apologize. We'll repent. But we know what you mean. Oh, you said Muhammad said this. Oh, you said this is in the Quran. Well, great. We can back up anything we said. But if you want to go ahead and post, now notice. I mean, we come here, we have a topic. We want to go through clips of Yusha Evans, but at the same time, we do also want to interact with our Muslim friends here. And the response so far has been, we're racist, and now we're just lying. And we don't know what we're lying about, so go ahead and share that. We'll take a look at it. But we've got a couple other comments here from Muhammad. In the meantime, He says, and that's what you do when you're defeated. You just lie. And the original Bible was obviously not corrupted if we believe it's from Allah. Well, it's good that you admit that the original Bible was not corrupted. But now you have to do the math. Follow me, Muhammad. Just pay attention. If you don't listen to anything else we say tonight, just listen to me for like the next 60 seconds. Right? You acknowledge that the original Bible wasn't corrupted. Why? Because Allah affirms the inspiration of our scriptures. So you have to grant that, right? But Allah also says in the Quran, chapter 18, verse 27, chapter 6, verse 115, no one can change his words. No one can, right? So we have preservation here. And if you go to chapter 7, verse 157 of the Quran, it refers to Christians who were still reading the gospel and Jews who are still reading the Torah during the time of Muhammad. So that's the 7th century. What's that mean? It means they still had the Bible, which you acknowledge was originally not corrupted. They still had it in the 7th century. What does that mean? Well, if it made it from the 1st century to the 7th century, that means they had it in the 1st century, the 2nd century, the 3rd century, the 4th century, the 5th century, the 6th century, and the 7th century. It's still not corrupted. Why is this relevant? Well, we have copies of the Bible from before that time, during that time, and after that time. The Bibles that we use today are translated from manuscripts that are before that time. So you just acknowledge that this is the uncorrupted scripture. Well, guess what? These uncorrupted scriptures that Christians have affirm Jesus' death, his resurrection, and his deity. And therefore, Islam is false. Now, notice what we have here. There are only two possibilities. Either what we have is corrupted or it's not corrupted. If it's not corrupted, Islam is false because what we have contradicts Islam. If it is corrupted, that's the only alternative. If it's corrupted, then Islam is false because Islam affirms the inspiration and preservation and authority of our scriptures. So, whatever you want to say about the Bible, you've got a problem here. Why are you still a Muslim?
Hey, let me. So, Muhammad, when you said, give us an example, what are we lying about? Mm-hmm. He said, well, give me a minute because the slow mode is on, right? So
okay.
I thought he was saying he's trying to get it out there. It's just taking him a minute. But then his next comment was this. What are the verses you referred to again?
Oh, okay.
But here's the problem. He's accusing us of lying.
Yeah, so he should know.
Yeah, and shouldn't you know before you say we're liars?
Yeah.
If you don't know, then you're not in a position to say we're lying.
Yeah.
Right? You can say I'm not confident that what you're saying is true. I'm skeptical. Prove this.
Yeah.
But to simply call us liars is simply not fair at all.
Yeah. So Muhammad, I'll just go ahead and say, instead of just saying, hey, you're lying, say, guys, I'm not familiar with those verses of the Quran. Could you share them with me? And I'd like to go take a look at them. And it might take me a while. I might not even be able to respond now, but I'll be back next time you guys are live streaming. And I'd like to discuss this further. That's how you respond if you disagree with someone, right? You just, not just, oh, liar, 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 liar. Everyone's a liar. Everyone's a demon, right? That's what Muslim apologists do with the Apostle Paul, right? Be better than that. Be better than your apologists. You can't be worse. One more from Muhammad. This was not his most recent comment, but he said, bro, I said you might be racist. 20 years ago in America, they tried to say Arabs and everyone in the Middle East is uncivilized. George, glad he's dead, Bush, and his censored New World Order. Notice, is there anything in here that he got right? Were American leaders saying, oh, Arabs and everyone in the Middle East is uncivilized? It's the opposite of what they're saying. They're saying Muhammad was a great man and his teachings are great and his religion is wonderful. That's what they said. Why do you misrepresent it? Why would you do that? Why would you say he's dead? What did he do? Yeah, I mean, he went to war over there. He went to war, but they weren't saying these kinds of things. So why would you falsely accuse him of saying things that he didn't say? Interesting. Anthony, I'm noticing a pattern here. In Islam, it's just call people racist, keep telling them that they say things that they didn't say, call them liars. And when you're given an opportunity to show where we lie, you just say, hey, what are the verses again? Oh, but let me go and give the argument. And matter of fact, Anthony, I'll give you a comment here to address here in a second. And I'll give Muhammad the verses. So I mentioned a couple. Write these down, Muhammad. Look them up. And if you want to get back to us next time, great. Go read them carefully. Read your commentaries. Look through them carefully, right? Surah 3, verses 3 to 4, affirms the inspiration of the Torah and the Gospel. You have multiple verses in the Quran affirming that no one can change Allah's words, right? So, according to Surah 3, verses 3 to 4, that would include the Torah and the Gospel. Chapter 18, verse 27, chapter 6, verse 115, I mentioned those in the context of Allah saying that no one can change his words. I mentioned Surah 7, verse 157 of the Quran, which says that, which talks about Jews and Christians during the time of Muhammad who were still reading the Torah and the Gospel. So you want to check that out. Surah 5, verse 43 of the Quran is interesting because some Jews came to Muhammad to settle a dispute, and Allah's response is, what do they need you for, Muhammad, when they have the Torah? Now notice, that only makes sense if the Quran is still affirming the authority of the Bible. If the Bible had been corrupted, the response would have been, of course they need you, Muhammad. Of course they need to come to you. Their scriptures are corrupted. But it wasn't. It was, Muhammad, you're irrelevant to the Jews because they have the Torah. Just a few verses after that, chapter 5, verse 47, Allah says that Christians are to judge by the gospel. Notice, that only makes sense if Christians in the 7th century still had the gospel. If it's been corrupted, it makes no sense for Allah to say that they need to judge by a corrupt book, right? Chapter 5, verse 68 says that Jews and Christians have no ground to stand upon unless we stand upon the Torah, the gospel, and the revelation that has come to us. And if you want some icing, a little, matter of fact, a little cherry on the Sunday here, go to Surah 10, verse 94. Where your own prophet, was having doubts about his revelations. He did that a lot. As Anthony pointed out, there were a lot of problems in Muhammad's life. Muhammad's first impression of his revelations was that they were demonic. He thought he was possessed by a demon. He tried to kill himself by hurling himself off a cliff. When that didn't work, he ran home to Khadijah, and Khadijah, who sees her husband suicidal and freaking out and thinking he's demon possessed, said, no, that's not a demon. You're a prophet. This is God giving you these revelations. So notice, Muhammad thinks he's demon-possessed. His wife convinces him, no. And his wife was in a situation where she would have said anything to keep Muhammad from jumping off a cliff, right? She didn't know what he encountered. On what planet is Khadijah an expert on who is and who isn't possessed? She's not, right? So your prophet had some problems, but even later, he would still have doubts. And in Surah 10, verse 94, Allah tells Muhammad that if he's in doubt about his revelations, go to the people of the book, go to the Jews and Christians to make sure that his revelations line up with ours. Why is that relevant? Well, that's according to Surah 10, verse 94, our scriptures are authoritative even over the Quran itself. Do you catch that, Muhammad? Right? If our scriptures were corrupted and not authoritative, then Allah wouldn't say, hey, you can go to the people of the book to make sure that your scriptures line up with their scriptures, right? That means that our scriptures are the authority here. The Bible is the authority, even according to the Quran. The Bible is the authority. And the only way you can know that your revelations are true is if your revelations line up with ours. That means that our revelations are the standard. Yours is just something that can be in line with it or not be in line with it. And so check out all those verses, and happy to do an entire live stream on that if you want. We can do a whole live stream going through those scriptures. But right now, we were talking about the Apostle Paul. Oh, did I just click off that? There we go. What did you think about this one, Anthony? How do you respond to the Islamic argument that Islam is true because Arabs beat Iranians and Romans in the 7th century and won the Crusades, and thus God is on their side?
A lot of problems there. If you're going to argue that Islam is true based on some of its victories, then we'd also have to say that Islam is false based on some of its losses. For example, one of the most noteworthy is the loss to Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours. Right? Charles Martel was not called the Hammer for nothing. He struck a mighty blow against Islam, prevented it from overtaking Europe. And it was a decisive defeat. The Muslims never were able to prevail upon them after that, and basically gave up. Right. So Islam has suffered many defeats throughout history. And if if you're going to talk about the defeat of the Arab defeating the Iranians and the Romans in the 7th century, what do you do with the fact that somebody just brought up Bush, in America, and we don't say that America is the Christian church. America is a nation. It's not the church, and so the actions of America are not the actions of the Christian church. That doesn't mean that I'm disagreeing. We'd have to spend a lot of time to parse out where we agree and disagree with things that we've done in our history that America has done. I'm simply making a distinction here, though, that if you're going to say that Muslims like to identify America with Christianity, well, somebody just brought up the fact that we went to war against Afghanistan and again in Iraq and so forth. Well, the Afghanistan and Iraq didn't win, right? I mean, I'm not saying that everything's pretty over there, but I'm just saying that if you're going to argue that Islam is true based on its successes, you also have to take into account its defeats. Mm-hmm. And then how do you parse that out? No, the way you determine whether or not something is true or not is by looking at the quality of the arguments. And so, for example, if somebody says Paul was deceived, and then you look at the evidence for that. There's no evidence that Paul was deceived, but we do find the kind of evidence of deception in the case of Muhammad, so I mean I think it's pretty easy. And when it comes to an argument, a proposition is true or false, and it's true or false based on the value of the factuality, right? The evidence that's offered for it, or the soundness of the reasoning that's offered for it. It's not based on who can punch who harder or what have you.
Yeah, and just notice you pointed out that hey, if Islamic victories are proof that it's from God, what would the defeats be? What would the defeats mean? And Muhammad suffered defeats, right? Battle of Uhud, and Muslims kept expanding, but the battles would go back and forth. Eventually, they're stopped. Eventually, they were pushed back out of Europe after invading and so on. But notice, if you wanted to, what's the pattern? Islam expanded rapidly and was eventually defeated. Well, if that's good enough to be proof that Islam is true, guess what? That happened with the Babylonians, that happened with the Persians, that happened with the Greeks, that happened with the Romans, that happened with every empire in history, right? So notice that's the Mongols who didn't follow this pattern of going out winning a ton of victories. Everyone we've ever heard of. So notice something like Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great started in Greece, fought all the way over until he's hitting India, then comes back. He dies along the way, but guess what? I mean, he won this massive empire. Does that mean that that paganism is true, that his religion is true? Seems very odd. But if you're wondering why Muhammad would have won these battles, guess what? I mean, his message, there is no greater message to convince a bunch of warriors to go out and fight, right? Muhammad's message, what he actually preached was, if you go out and fight for me, two possibilities. Either you live or you die. If you live, then we're going to divide up the women. We're going to divide up the spoils. We're going to seize a bunch of property. You're going to have sex slaves. It's going to be awesome. That's if you live. If you die, well, you're going to paradise where Allah is going to bless you to spend eternity deflowering virgins. That's his message. We would be shocked if that didn't convince people to go out and fight for him. And they fought, and he convinced them to fight very valiantly because your willingness to die was massively enhanced by Islam. So you would just fling yourself into battle, whereas other people from other backgrounds are actually doing everything they can to survive.
Yeah, let me throw in one other thing here. When you look at the history of Israel, you see that Israel at times wins and Israel at times loses. According to Muslims, these were the people of God. Even if they want to say now, the Jews have been set aside or rejected or what have you, and Islam is the uncorrupted, pure form of the truth. They did believe that the people of God under Moses, under Joshua, under David were God's people. And yet under all those people, there were wins and losses. And so even by Muslim logic, this wouldn't follow that just because they won, that makes them true. Or if they lost, that makes them false. But there's another thing to observe here. God himself throughout Scripture explains, there are a number of reasons why God would cause his people to win at certain times and not at others. And, we're not always given a reason for it. God's purposes are ultimately belong to him, and it's only when he makes them known that we can then speak confidently to them. But we have examples in Scripture where God says that he's allowing one nation to prevail against another because it serves some purpose that he has. And take, for example, Isaiah 10, speaking of the Assyrians. Here he's talking about the Assyrians going against his people and actually winning against them. It's a prophecy. But it says, "Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, and the staff in whose hand is my indignation. I will send him against an ungodly nation, and against the people of my wrath. I will give him charge to seize the spoil, to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets." Now, I won't read the whole passage. You can read the rest of that on your own. There's several interesting things here. God speaks of the nation of Assyria going against a godless people. In the context, it's talking about the Jews. It's talking about God's people. And the reason they're being referred to as godless is because they've turned to idolatry. And so what's going on here in this passage is God saying, I'm going to let the Assyrians then go against you and plunder you as a chastisement for you because of your sins. Right now, this wasn't a proof that Assyria had the true religion. The Lord's whole point is, you guys are idolaters, you're worshiping idols, I'm going to send an idolatrous and godless people against you. And that's why he says not only that Assyria is the rod of his anger, but it starts by saying, woe to Assyria. In other words, the same nation that I'm using to punish you, I'm going to turn around and punish them as well, because they're idolaters as well. So, the fact that one nation wins at one point doesn't mean that they have the truth on their side.
Check this out, Anthony. So Muhammad said, and again, Muhammad, who's in the comment section here, said, lol, this is what I mean by outright lies. Where you get this info from, and he's not talking to Muhammad, Allah is making an argument. So notice he calls us liars based on me claiming that Allah is talking to Muhammad here. Why is this hilarious? Well, he must be, he must have looked this up in the Quran. Do me a favor, Muhammad, look it up in Arabic. Why? Because if you go to translations of the Quran, which actually include who this is being directed towards, you'll see, let me go ahead and read a couple such translations. So the Pickthall translation, for instance, when Allah is speaking to Muhammad, he'll put in parentheses Muhammad. So here's Pickthall. And if thou, Muhammad, art in doubt concerning that which we reveal unto thee, right? He includes Muhammad. Why does he include Muhammad? Because this is speaking to Muhammad, which you just laughed at and called us liars for saying. Hilali Khan. This is Hilali Khan. This is the official translation of Saudi Arabia, right? What's he say? So if you, O Muhammad, are in doubt concerning that which we have revealed to you, wait a minute, you call us liars for saying that this is speaking to Muhammad. How do these translators know that this is speaking to Muhammad and not to people in general, to Muslims in general, or something like that? Well, when Allah is speaking to Muhammad, he speaks second person singular, right? Second person singular. He speaks directly to Muhammad. He's not speaking to everyone else. He's speaking to Muhammad. So is he speaking to Muhammad here? Yes, absolutely. Look it up. And you just called us liars for saying it. What did we just tell you, right? We know if you disagree with us, your first instinct is to yell liar. Why? Because that's what your apologists do. That's what you guys do, right? We're inviting you to be better than that, right? To be better than that, to say, okay, well, why are you saying that this is talking to Muhammad? I don't see this. I don't see how this is talking to Muhammad. And that we could explain it for you, and then you would embarrass yourself like this, right? So we've got that, Anthony. Now, he posted another comment here. He says Allah's making an argument, but then he describes the argument, right? He says, exactly, if you're in doubt about where the Bible came from and where the Torah came from, check to see if they line up. And indeed they do. How do you misunderstand that? Well, no, that's not what he says. He's talking about the revelations to Muhammad. So if you, Muhammad, are in doubt concerning that which we have revealed to you, Muhammad, second person singular, speaking directly to Muhammad. Muhammad, if you're in doubt about what we have revealed to you, ask those who read the book before you. These are the people of the book. These are Jews and Christians. So Muhammad was having doubts. Allah told him, if you're in doubt, go to those people. Notice, this doesn't make any sense if Muhammad's not in doubt, right? Because why would he be even bringing it up, right? But he tells Muhammad, if you're in doubt, go to those people. Well, what does this mean? It means we still have reliable scriptures from God, and that our scriptures are authoritative even over the Quran. Because if the Quran doesn't line up with ours, the message is so much for the Quran, right? That's the only way Muhammad can actually affirm his revelations from this verse, is to see if they line up with ours. And so it sounds like you're acknowledging that the Torah and the gospel are authoritative here. Well, guess what? They don't line up with the Quran. So we can look at this and say, amen. The Quran is telling us if Muhammad's revelations don't line up with ours, so much for the Quran. Well, so much for the Quran. All right, Anthony, what are we doing here? It seems we've got 4 more Yusha Evans clips. I think we're going to have to start over again in the next live stream.
Yeah, and the more outrageous ones haven't. I mean, not outrageous in the sense of just terribly false, but they're just so wild, right? I mean, it's like he thought. I don't know. I don't even know how the thought process works for people like this. I don't know how they come up with some of the things they say. Do they, just reason, I'm going to go out there and when I'm asked a question about Christianity, I'm going to say the craziest thing that pops into my mind first? Or, I mean, I just don't know how it works. But he makes some pretty outlandish claims, right?
I know how it works. They just get in the habit of being speaking in front of audiences that just do not hold them accountable, right? If you or I were to go to an audience of Christians and were to just completely make things up, like Yusuf Estes does, right? If we were to go up and say, Muhammad was actually in the 3rd century, not in the 7th century, and it wasn't in Mecca, it was in China, and we were just to make up outlandish things that we couldn't possibly defend. It would be Christians who held us accountable. Even if there was a room there, if there were a room full of Christians who had never looked into any of this, well, some of them would be shocked at what we were saying, and some of them would go and look it up, and they would call us out on it. And then once the clips get online of what we're saying, then other Christians around the world are going to start sending us message. You got this wrong. You got this wrong. You got this wrong. You got this wrong. I've been live before, where I said something wrong, or I got some not intentionally, but like one time, I said, come on, we've got like 5,800 manuscripts of the Gospel of John, right? Now, we have around 5,800 Greek manuscripts, but not 5,800 Greek manuscripts of the Gospel of John, because some of the manuscripts are just parts of other Gospels or parts of letters and so on. As soon as I said that, while I was live, James White sends me an email and says, actually, it's not 50. Keep in mind, it's not 5,800 of the Gospel of John. It's 5,800 total manuscripts. And many of those don't include the Gospel of John. So notice there was an immediate inclination to correct me for saying something wrong. Mm-hmm. There have been times where I've been talking and I got the reference wrong or something like this, and we would cut to a commercial while doing a show, and Sam would go, yo, you got the reference wrong, man. You said this verse, and so there is this tendency of Christians to hold each other accountable. But you got people like Yusuf Estes and Yusha Evans, and the reason they can say these completely false, completely ridiculous, completely absurd things that wouldn't allow them to make it through the first week of a 101 course of Christian history is that the Muslim community just isn't like that. It's please lie to us. Please make things up about Christianity. The more absurd and outlandish the things you make up are, the more we're going to love you and praise you for it.
So Muhammad in the comment section says that we were lying about
lying?
About Muhammad wanting to commit suicide. He says, "Where did you get that info? That's an outright lie." So apparently he doesn't know. He doesn't know the sources.
Doesn't know.
I mean, I have some pulled up. I don't know if you want me to read those.
Yeah, you go ahead and start. I'll pull up more because we've got a bunch of them.
Okay, so this particular one is a long one. I'm not going to read the entire thing.
Yeah, give the reference and then he can look it up more. All
right. So this is from Alfred Goulamez's or is it Guillaume?
It's Guillaume. Go with the French.
Guillaume.
It's spelled Guillaume, but yeah,
Yeah.
The French are ridiculous and pronounce things in weird ways.
His translation of Ibn Ishaq's Life of Muhammad, Surat Rasulullah, and it records a narration from Aisha, and it's talking about when Muhammad encountered an unidentified spirit. Muslims now, that is after the fact, identify that being as Gabriel, and that comes about through some interesting circumstances. But originally, this unidentified spirit that appears to Muhammad it's a frightening spectacle to him, and it's not a pleasant experience. In fact, the accounts tell us that this being chokes Muhammad more than once, getting him to comply or submit. And anyways, after Muhammad flees from the cave, it says that he goes to his wife, right? And he actually says to Aisha, it says that Allah's apostle returned with the inspiration, his neck muscles twitching with terror till he entered upon Khadijah and said, "Cover me, cover me." They covered him. So he wants her to cover him with a blanket, right? Like a child would do if it thought there was a monster under its bed or something like that. So he runs to his wife and asks her to cover him and comfort him and so forth. And he says, "Oh, Khadijah, what's wrong with me?" Then he told her everything that had happened and said, "I fear that something may happen to me." Khadijah said, "Never." Now, other sources tell us that he says he fears that he had been possessed. So the hadith, the narration goes on and says that she eventually gets Waraka to come and console Muhammad. But what happens is, while Waraka comes and says, well, maybe it was the same Gabriel who spoke to the other prophets, right? Now, Waraka, what's interesting is, although he was a Christian, he's simply wrong here, right? We're not told that Gabriel was the one who spoke to Moses, that he's the one who spoke to the other prophets, right? In fact, Moses, we're told, spoke with God face to face, and the other prophets received inspiration directly from God. But in any case, I mean, you do have some angel or angelic activity, especially though with the prophet Daniel, but it's not the characteristic feature of Old Testament prophethood, and they're certainly not encounters that involve physically manhandling a human being until he submits and is so frightened that he wants his wife to cover him in a blanket. But anyways, after Waraka dies, the narration goes on. It says, after Waraka died and the divine inspiration was paused for a while, the prophet became so sad, as we have heard, that he intended several times to throw himself from the tops of high mountains. And every time he went up to the top of a mountain in order to throw himself down, Gabriel would appear before him and say, "Oh, Muhammad, you are indeed Allah's apostle in truth." But it mentions that there are several cycles of this. He would encounter this being, and then later he'd want to commit suicide, and he'd be stopped, and then he'd be consoled for a while, but then later he'd want to commit suicide again.
And and then even later when the revelation stopped. So he thinks he's demon possessed, so he decides he's going to go kill himself. He tries to hurl himself off a cliff. But this happens multiple times. He tries repeatedly to hurl himself off a cliff. Then he concludes that he's a prophet. He gets convinced that he's a prophet. And later, when the revelations stop for a while, he's mad that Gabriel's not coming to him anymore. So he goes and tries and hurls himself off a cliff. Sahih al-Bukhari, 6982. And if you want some references, Muhammad Ibn Ishaq, page 106. That's what Anthony was referring to. The History of At-Tabari, volume 6. You can start on page 68. Where he's talking about being suicidal once again. Sahih al-Bukhari, 6982. But after a few days, Waraka died, and the divine revelation was also paused for a while, and the prophet became so sad, as we have heard, that he intended several times to throw himself from the tops of high mountains. Every time he went up to the top of a mountain in order to throw himself down, Jibreel would appear before him and say, "Muhammad, you are indeed Allah's messenger in truth," whereupon his heart would become quiet, and he would calm down and would return home. So think about what Anthony is saying here, right? Muhammad, at every stage of the way, right? And man, I just want to keep reading these over and over again, just until it sinks in, right? So he tried to kill himself after he started receiving revelations. He tried repeatedly to kill himself. When the revelation stopped, he tries to kill himself. We say he tried to kill himself, and your response is, "You're liars! You're liars!" Direct quote, it's up on the screen. "You're liars for saying that the prophet wanted to kill himself."
Now, David, notice how this ties in with the passage you read earlier that Muhammad thought was you were misusing, right? You said that Allah is addressing Muhammad. Mm-hmm. Muhammad, if you're in doubt about the revelations, right, that have been sent down to you, go and ask those who have been reading the scriptures before you. So if all these sources, once you're now informed of these sources and what they say, you realize that Muhammad was constantly plagued with doubts about the veracity of his revelations, the source of them. And remember, part of the belief of the Arabs at the time was that those who excelled in poetry did so because they were possessed by the desert jinn. Mm-hmm. And actually, this explains a lot of what's going on in the Quran, by the way. This is why Muhammad would later try and claim, that nobody can bring forth something like the Quran. This is why he would challenge the jinn even to get together and produce something like it, because what he's trying to do is overcome his thoughts about the source of his own inspiration, right? He initially thinks that he's undergoing the same sort of experience that these other Arab poets experienced, according to the Arabs, and nothing is permanently causing that doubt to go away, so that every time there's a pause in the revelation, his doubts come back to him and he wants to go commit suicide again. Mm-hmm. And so this would account for why he's told in the Quran to go and ask the Jews and Christians and see if what he's saying lines up with what they're saying. Right now, we know somebody might say, well, what sense would it make if Satan's involved here? Why would he say, go and ask them, right? He knows that what the Jews and the Christians have in their possession doesn't agree with him. Well, remember, Satan's first attack, even in the according to the Bible, is not necessarily to deny the truthfulness of Scripture. If he can manipulate the understanding of Scripture, then he's content with that, right? He achieves the same result. That's why when he appears to Christ, he quotes Scripture to him. He attempts to get him to misapply a text of Scripture. Remember, he quotes the Psalms where it says that God will give his angels charge concerning you, lest you dash your foot against a stone. So if God's promising to protect you, why not throw yourself down, right? In fact, notice Satan saying, throw yourself down. And what does Jesus say? Yeah, I want to throw myself down. No, he says, don't put the Lord your God to the test. Jesus answers with Scripture. He's quoting from Deuteronomy 8. Muhammad, on the other hand, is saying to himself, I want to throw myself down. And, but the point is, and at the same time, Satan also knows that Muhammad doesn't have the ability to read the Hebrew text that the Jews would be in possession of, or the Greek scriptures. And so there's always the option, if Muhammad goes to the Jews and Christians and they tell him something different, there's always the option to tell Muhammad at that point, they're lying to you, right? Mm-hmm. Which is ultimately what Muhammad that's the conclusion he arrives at. He doesn't say their scriptures have been corrupted. He says they're distorting what the scriptures say with their own tongue. Or they're trying to trick you with these other writings that aren't the book. Right? He doesn't say they don't have the book. He doesn't say the book has been corrupted. He says they're misinterpreting it, they're lying to you about it, or they're tricking you about what the book is.
Yeah. So notice, everyone, we've been called liars.
And racist.
And racist over and over again. How many times have we actually been lying? How many times have we said something that we couldn't immediately back up with facts? Right. So we're trying to help you here, Muhammad. You obviously don't know what's in the Quran. You obviously don't know what's in the other Muslim sources, or you wouldn't be calling us liars, right? If you'd studied the Hadith, you'd know that Muhammad tried to kill himself. If you'd studied the Sirah, you'd know that Muhammad tried to kill himself. Matter of fact, even if you study the Quran, you find out that Muhammad really needs to be reminded over and over again that he's sane. Now, what prophet needs to constantly be reminded, hey, you're actually okay. You're not crazy here. And everyone else around him needed to be constantly reminded that he's not insane. Right? So let me just read a couple verses here. Chapter 7, verse 184. Do they not reflect? There is no madness in their companion, Muhammad. He is but a plain warner. 23, verse 70. Or do they say he is possessed? Nay, he has brought them the truth, but most of them hate the truth. Surah 34, verse 46. Say, O Muhammad, I do admonish you on one point, that you stand up for Allah, in pairs or singly, and reflect within yourselves. Your companion, Muhammad, is not possessed. He is no less than a warner to you in face of a terrible penalty. Notice, this is Allah telling Muhammad to go tell people, I'm not possessed. Right? So this is Allah. Muhammad, go tell everyone you're not possessed. This is interesting stuff here. Surah 37, verses 35 to 36. For they, when they were told that there is no God except Allah, would puff themselves up with pride and say, what? Shall we give up our gods for the sake of a poet possessed? Notice, that's what Muhammad wanted to kill himself over. He didn't want people saying that he was possessed. Nay, he has come with the truth, and he confirms the message of the apostles before him. Surah 52, verse 29. Therefore, remind and preach, O Muhammad, by the grace of Allah, you are neither a soothsayer nor a madman. It's Allah. Muhammad, keep in mind that you're not a madman. You're not insane. You're not possessed, over and over again like a beating drum. Surah 68, verse 2. You, Muhammad, are not, by the grace of your Lord, a madman. Muhammad's by grace that I can say, you're not crazy. You're not insane. Surah 81, verse 22. And, O people, your companion is not a madman. Anthony, how many of the prophets needed to be reminded on a daily basis and needed all of their followers to memorize verses saying, he's not insane, he's not insane? And how many prophets needed to be constantly reminded by Allah and have all the people around them constantly saying, he's not insane, he's not insane, he's not insane? How many prophets?
What would you think if we were hanging out and every once in a while, just out of the blue, I said something like, David, I'm not a thief.
I'm not crazy, man. Yeah, hey, look, I'm not a child molester. I don't care what you've heard, Anthony. I am not a child molester. I know we weren't even talking about that, but I just want to point out I am not a rapist.
And for the record, I didn't steal that $5 that you didn't bring up.
Yeah, guys, I mean, we're joking here, but that's a serious point. Imagine someone who needed to constantly declare and remind everyone and receive revelations from God that he's not a rapist or something like that. Wouldn't you think there's something weird there? Like something really weird? What about a prophet who needs to be constantly reminded that he's not demon possessed and he's not insane? How many prophets are like that? I can think of one.
Only one.
Oh, boy. All right. So, Muhammad, again, you don't know what's in your sources. So when we say something that you think is wrong, it's very easy. Hey, guys, you just said that Muhammad tried to commit suicide. He wanted to commit suicide. I've realized from experience that whenever you guys say something, you're basing it on my sources. So could you give me the references so that I can look them up? That's how you respond. That's how you do it. You know, liars! And then embarrass yourself. Come on. Straightforward here. All right. Well, we're about out of time. Let's go ahead and end on a positive note here. How do we Christians explain to people or ourselves that Jesus was sometimes praying to the Father? Thank you for your time. We've actually dealt with that on a bunch of shows. I'll go ahead and give you a short answer. Anthony can add anything he wants to it, and then we'll close out. But I would just start by breaking down Christian theology. Christian theology is that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit have always existed from all eternity in a perfect, loving relationship. So, according to Christian theology, the divine Son entered creation as Jesus of Nazareth. And as James White has said, once the Son enters creation, takes on human nature, and is existing as a man, is he going to live as an atheist, or is he going to continue that communion, that relationship that he has had with the Father from all eternity? Is he going to continue that, which, as a man, he would continue that through prayer, right? So notice that it's really that simple. It's if you want to say Christian theology is false, if Muslims want to say, oh, well, God is not a Trinity, or the divine Son didn't enter into creation or something like that. If they want to deny one of those points, yeah, then they can deny that. But if they're saying, hey, it doesn't make sense that you're saying Jesus is God, but you're saying he prayed. Well, if you understand what we're actually saying, that God is a Trinity, that the Son entered creation, and that the Son would continue speaking to the Father as he's done through all eternity, that fits, right? What's the alternative? That he would become an atheist? That he would sever his relationship with the Father? That he would no longer have that communion with the Father? So the response is to challenge or reject Christian theology. That's what a critic should do. But to say, you Christians have your theology, but here I can refute you because you say Jesus is God and yet he prayed to the Father. Well, that just shows that they don't know what they're talking about. If they're saying that this somehow contradicts our theology. Our theology fits perfectly with this. This is exactly what we would expect given our theology. Want to add anything, Anthony?
Yeah, I'll just throw in two verses. The first just shows the biblical basis for the point you were making. John 1:1 says, in the beginning was the Word being a title of the Lord Jesus Christ. This is apparent from verse 14 where it says, the Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. So the Word is a title for the divine Son. So John begins the gospel by saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the construction in Greek here is significant, but it indicates that the Word has always been. He didn't come into being. The Word, when everything began, the Word already was. So in the beginning was the Word, and then it goes on to say, and the Word was with God. And there, again, the construction is significant. It indicates the easiest way to express it is that there's a face-to-face relationship that's being described here. The Word was in the beginning, and the Word was face-to-face with God. And we've already learned from verse 14 that the Word is a title for the Lord Jesus. We also learned from verse 14 that the one he was with was the Father, right? He's the only begotten from the Father. So when John starts by saying the Word was from all eternity, and he was with God, he means the Father. And then the very next clause of John 1:1 says, and the Word was God. And once again, and we can't get into all the details of this, the construction is significant. John says that the Word is everything that the Father is. He is what, he's not saying he is the Father, he's saying he is what the Father is. So the Father is God, and so is the Word. But the point here is that David was saying that here Jesus has this eternal fellowship with the Father. Would he come to earth and suddenly stop talking to the Father? That's contrary to what we would expect. There's certainly no theological problem, right? If God was one person, there'd be a problem if we said that God became incarnate and then he's talking to someone, right? But if God is tripersonal and one of those persons becomes incarnate, there's no problem with him speaking to one of the other persons of the Godhead. The second point that I would make is simply to look at the content of Jesus' prayer. The content of Christ's prayer show that this is exactly the case, right? They don't disprove that Christ is God or that God is not triune. In fact, they show the very opposite. John 17:5, for example, is a prayer of Jesus. He says, Father, glorify me with the glory which I had with you before the world became. So here's Jesus saying, in his own words, the very thing that John says at the beginning of the gospel. John says the Word was with God and the Word was God from all eternity. Here's Jesus saying that he was with the Father before the world became, and he's praying to the Father to, exalt him back to himself now in our nature as our representative, as our Savior, to be exalted back into the presence of the Father and, be restored to that outward manifestation of his glory that he had always possessed and enjoyed from eternity past. So Christ praying is not a problem for Christians. However, there is a problem for Allah, isn't there?
Yeah.
That's another story.
Yeah, so what Anthony's alluding to there is that if you're a Trinitarian and you understand what Trinitarians believe, there's no contradiction in saying that we're Trinitarians and that the Son speaks to the Father. That makes perfect sense. In Islam, Allah prays according to the Quran and according to the Hadith. And so if you're a Unitarian, one in being, God is one in being and one in person, then you got a problem because Allah is praying. So big problem. I have no doubt that Muhammad's going to say we're liars here, because even before that, after we went through everything, after we gave sources for everything we said, Quran verses, passages from the Hadith and the Sirah, his response to all of that was, I'm on slow mode. I can barely defend myself, but you are a liar. You lied, but you won't highlight that. You're selective, dishonest, insincere. Guys, how many lies has he called us out on, and how many times has he been completely wrong?
And how many times has he said we're a liar and then asked, what were those verses again?
Yeah. Proving that he has no clue what he's talking about, hasn't read his sources. But hey, this is our new Salmon player, apparently.
I saw Salmon player in here earlier.
Yeah,
I don't think he's been as active, though.
Yeah, these guys are, they might be brothers or something like that, because they are, unless this is just common in Islam. But, Muhammad, hope to see you again. Anthony, we didn't actually get to the video clips. We have them all pulled up. When do you want to cover those?
I don't know. I'm game. Tomorrow, next Friday.
All right, looks like we'll be back tomorrow, since we're all set for it. But yeah, tomorrow we're going to have to move along a little quickly. We probably don't want to go a full 2 hours or stuff like that for just a couple of short video clips. So this will be the groundwork. We've laid out our basic case. Tomorrow we'll come back. We'll go kind of more rapid fire, going through Yusha's claims and play some video clips. We'll respond to them quickly, go through those. Muhammad, hope you come back, and you can call us a liar tomorrow, even when we're quoting your sources to you, giving you chapter and verse references, showing that what we say is absolutely true. Sure, you'll be calling us a liar again. But just keep in mind, if every time we say something that's true, it somehow contradicts what you already believe, and so you call us a liar, what does that mean? It means you have a lot of false beliefs, and you know it now. We've shown you, right? You say, he wasn't suicidal. That's a lie. And we show you from your own sources that he was suicidal repeatedly, which means that you thought it was false, but it was true. So you have a lot of false beliefs about your prophet and about what's in your books. Instead of just calling everyone liars, might be good to actually do some studying. We're happy to help you with that. All right. Looks like we'll be back tomorrow night, 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time, where we will again be discussing Yusha Evans' view of the Apostle Paul. See everyone there.